Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Rachel Patel found the pattern in the incident reports at 2:17 a.m., 3 hours into a graveyard shift she'd volunteered for to prove she wasn't the rookie everyone thought she was. 7 disappearances over 14 years, all in Yellowstone's Lamar Valley backcountry, all between January and February, all during new moon phases. But that wasn't what made her hands go cold. It was the witness statements, the ones that had been filed as unreliable due to hypothermia-induced confusion. Every single hiker before vanishing had reported extreme hunger, despite full packs of food, had stripped bark from pine trees with their fingernails, had been heard speaking Ojibwe or Cree despite none of them knowing those languages, and Lucas Webb, missing now for 18 hours in tonight's blizzard, had radioed at 6 p.m. yesterday saying he was so hungry it hurts to think, his last known position placing him exactly where the pattern predicted the 8th disappearance would occur. Rachel stared at the computer screen in the ranger station's cramped office, the only sound the building's heating system fighting against Wyoming January cold. Outside, the blizzard that had been forecast as moderate snow had intensified into whiteout conditions, temperature dropping to -28 Fahrenheit, with wind chill pushing it past -40. The kind of cold that killed exposed skin in minutes, that turned breath to ice crystals before it left your lungs, that made rescue operations impossible until conditions improved. She'd been a Yellowstone Ranger for exactly 3 months and 4 days. Fresh from her training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, 24 years old, raised in San Diego, where cold meant wearing a light jacket, assigned to winter duty because nobody else wanted it, and rookies didn't get to choose. The veterans, Rangers who'd worked Yellowstone for decades, treated her with polite skepticism, giving her the grunt work, the night shifts, the paperwork nobody else wanted to touch. So she'd volunteered for this. Solo overnight duty at the Lamar Valley Station, organizing the backlog of incident reports from the past 20 years, a task that should have been mind-numbing, but would show she was willing to do the unglamorous work. Instead, she'd found something that made her 3 months of training feel pathetically inadequate. Rachel pulled up Lucas Webb's file. Senior Ranger, age 42, 18 years at Yellowstone, expert in winter survival and wolf ecology. He'd gone out yesterday afternoon to check on a wolf den site near Druid Peak. Routine work, was supposed to return by 7 p.m. His last radio transmission at 6:04 p.m. Something's wrong. I'm looking at my emergency rations, 2 days worth of food, and all I can think about is how it's not enough. How nothing will ever be enough. Jesus, I'm so hungry. The trees here, they're all wrong. Bark stripped in spirals like something pulled it off with static. Then nothing. The veteran rangers had launched search operations at dawn, but the blizzard had forced them back within 2 hours. Current conditions made helicopter support impossible, snowmobile access limited to main roads. The official plan was to wait for weather improvement, probably 36 hours minimum. Lucas had winter gear, emergency shelter, satellite communicator. He was experienced. He knew how to survive. But so had the other 7. Rachel cross-referenced the locations, pulling up topographic maps on the dual monitors. All 8 incidents clustered in a 3-mile radius around coordinates 44.9156 degree N, 110.1847 degree W, in the remote backcountry between Lamar Valley and the Absaroka Range. The area included no maintained trails, no roads, no structures except an abandoned weather station from the 1960s. It was wolf territory, grizzly habitat, dangerous even in summer. In January, it was effectively another planet. She zoomed in on satellite imagery. The terrain showed dense lodgepole pine forest, interspersed with geothermal features, hot springs, steam vents, sulfur deposits. Yellowstone sat atop a supervolcano, and the Lamar Valley backcountry was one of the most geothermally active areas in the park. In winter, the contrast between ground heat and air temperature created fog banks, steam columns, areas where snow melted in geometric patterns around thermal vents, and there, in the high-resolution imagery from last summer, trees. Dozens of them, visible even from satellite altitude, stripped of bark in spiral patterns, white wood exposed like bones. Rachel's phone buzzed. Text from her supervisor, Dale Morrison, one of the veterans who'd made it clear he thought she was too young, too inexperienced, too urban for Yellowstone winters. Weather worsening. Stay at station. Do not attempt solo operations. We'll reassess at 800. She should listen. Should stay here where it was warm and safe. Should wait for the experienced rangers to handle it. Should remember that she was 3 months on the job and had never even seen a real blizzard before moving to Wyoming. But Lucas Webb was out there, and the pattern said tonight, new moon, January, extreme cold, was when people vanished. Rachel opened her locker, started pulling out gear. She had training, even if minimal. She had equipment, even if she wasn't confident using it. And she had something the veterans didn't. She'd actually read those incident reports, had seen the pattern, understood what they were dealing with. Not that she could tell anyone what she suspected. How could she explain that 7 disappearances over 14 years matched the behavioral patterns described in Algonquian folklore about the Wendigo? A cannibalistic spirit driven by insatiable hunger, awakened by starvation and extreme cold, hunting those who violated the boundary between civilization and wilderness. She'd taken a Native American Studies course at UC San Diego, had written a paper on supernatural entities in Ojibwe tradition. The professor had presented Wendigo as cultural metaphor, a way indigenous peoples articulated the psychological horror of starvation during brutal winters. Rachel had gotten an A-. The professor had never suggested the Wendigo might be literally real. But those trees, the bark stripped in spirals, that was how witnesses described Wendigo territory. The creature scratching at trees with elongated fingers, marking its hunting ground, the spiral pattern representing the endless hunger that drove it. Rachel dressed in layers, thermal underwear, fleece, insulated pants, parka rated to -40, balaclava, goggles, expedition weight gloves. She loaded her pack, Garmin InReach satellite communicator, spare batteries and insulated case, emergency bivy, chemical heat packs, first aid kit, water in insulated bottles, 4,000 calories in energy bars, headlamp, spare, radio, spare, her service pistol, Glock 22 with 2 spare magazines, though she had no idea what good bullets would do against something from Algonquian mythology. At 3:47 a.m., Rachel stepped into the blizzard. The cold hit like a physical blow, wind driving snow horizontally, visibility reduced to maybe 20 feet. Her goggles immediately fogged, forcing her to adjust them, expose her face for 3 seconds that left her cheeks burning with frostbite's first warning. The parking lot lights created halos in the snow, everything beyond that radius disappearing into white static. Her Garmin showed Lucas's last known coordinates, 3 miles northeast, bearing 045 degrees, elevation gain of 1,200 feet through terrain she'd never navigated. Rachel oriented herself, started hiking, immediately stumbled over a parking barrier she hadn't seen under the snow. 3 months. 3 months of training. 3 months of veterans watching her, waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to prove she didn't belong here. She kept walking. The first hour was hell. The wind screamed through the lodgepole pines, each gust threatening to knock her off her feet. Snow had drifted 4 feet deep in places, forcing her to break trail, her thighs burning within 30 minutes. The headlamp beam reflected off 10 million snowflakes, creating a disorienting white blur that made depth perception impossible. She fell twice, caught herself on her poles, kept moving. The Garmin guided her northeast, tracking her progress at roughly 1 mile per hour, far slower than she'd calculated. At this rate, reaching Lucas's position would take 7 hours, assuming she didn't get lost, didn't injure herself, didn't freeze to death first. Her radio crackled. To all units, visibility 0, all operations suspended until... Rachel turned the volume down. She'd made her choice. At the 2-hour mark, the terrain changed. The forest opened into a thermal basin. Snow melted away in irregular patches, revealing yellow sulfur deposits and steaming vents. The temperature differential created thick fog that mixed with the blizzard, reducing visibility to 10 feet. Rachel's goggles frosted over constantly, forcing her to navigate by GPS alone, trusting coordinates instead of sight. And that's when she heard it. Whistling. Not wind. Melody. Someone whistling a tune she almost recognized coming from somewhere in the fog ahead. Lucas? Her voice disappeared into the storm. Lucas Webb? The whistling continued, circling, always just ahead. Rachel followed, boots crunching on ground that alternated between frozen and scalding depending on proximity to thermal vents. The fog parted briefly and she saw them. Trees. Pine trees with bark stripped in perfect spirals, exposed wood gray-white and ancient despite the wounds looking fresh, dozens of them, creating a perimeter around something. At the center stood a figure, too tall, too thin, proportions wrong in ways that hurt to look at directly. It wore what might have been Lucas's ranger uniform, but the clothes hung loose, as if the body inside had been stretched and compressed in impossible ways. It turned its head, movement too smooth, too fluid, and Rachel's headlamp caught its face. Lucas's face, but wrong. Skin pulled tight over bones that had grown longer, sharper, eyes sunken so deep they were just hollows filled with shadow. Mouth open, jaw distended, teeth that looked normal in shape, but wrong in number. Too many, doubling the rows, like a shark. When it spoke, Lucas's voice layered over something else, something that formed words in a language Rachel didn't know but understood anyway, meaning impressed directly on her mind. So hungry, always hungry, never enough. She made me understand, made me feel what she feels, forever starving, forever feeding, forever empty. Rachel's hand went to her pistol, muscle memory from training. The thing that had been Lucas moved, speed that defied physics, and suddenly it was 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell it. Rot and pine sap and something metallic, like blood frozen so cold it turned to crystal. She wants you to understand too, it said, Lucas's voice breaking through the other voice, pleading now. Wants you to feel the hunger. It's not so bad once you stop fighting, once you accept that everything is food, everyone is food. The hunger makes it simple. Makes everything simple. Its hand reached out, fingers too long, too many joints, and touched Rachel's face. Through her balaclava, through her layers, she felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with absence. Absence of warmth, of life, of satisfaction, of ever being full. And with the cold came hunger. Sudden, overwhelming, all-consuming. Rachel's stomach cramped. Her mouth flooded with saliva, her mind filled with single thought. Feed. The emergency bars in her pack seemed impossible to reach, seemed inadequate, seemed like nothing compared to the hunger that demanded flesh, bone, marrow. The hunger that looked at her own fingers and wondered what they would taste like. Rachel stumbled backward, ripping away from the thing's touch. The hunger faded, but didn't disappear, settling into her stomach like a stone made of appetite. She fumbled for her radio. Hoffman to base, emergency, emergency, I've located Webb, but... Static answered thick and wrong, and through it came whistling. The same melody. Closer now. Not from the thing wearing Lucas, but from behind her. Rachel spun, headlamp catching movement in the fog. Another figure. Tall, gaunt, wearing the shredded remains of hiking gear from decades ago. Then another, and another. 7 figures total, all impossibly thin, all moving with that too fluid motion, all whistling in harmony that shouldn't be possible with human throats. The previous victims. The 7 disappearances from the incident reports. They hadn't died. They'd been changed, transformed, made into extensions of something older and hungrier. At the center of them all stood a figure that made the others look almost human by comparison. 8 feet tall, skeletal, skin gray-white like birch bark stripped by winter, limbs elongated and multi-jointed like spider legs. Its face was almost featureless, just eye sockets glowing with dim phosphorescence, and a mouth that split the head nearly in half, filled with ice crystal teeth. It wore antlers, massive rack from what must have been an enormous elk, but the antlers had been incorporated into its skull, growing through bone and flesh. The Wendigo, the original, the first. It spoke in the language Rachel didn't know, voice like winter wind through dead trees, and meaning flooded her mind. You came into my territory, my hunting ground, during my season. When the moon hides and the cold rules, you came knowing what awaited. The pattern is not hidden. The pattern is invitation. I call them here. I sing in their dreams, whisper through their radios, make them feel hunger they never felt before, make them understand that civilization is thin, meat is meat, and winter makes all things equal. Rachel's training had covered wildlife encounters, bears, wolves, mountain lions, had covered environmental hazards, hypothermia, avalanches, falls, had covered nothing remotely applicable to this. She backed away slowly, hand still on her pistol, knowing it was useless but drawing anyway because it was all she had. The Wendigo moved forward, each step covering impossible distance, and suddenly Rachel's back hit a tree, one of the bark-stripped spirals. She could feel grooves carved into wood, could feel them through her gloves, through her parka, pressing into her spine like a brand. You will join, the Wendigo said, not question, but statement. You will feed, you will understand. The hunger is truth. The hunger is all. Everything else, your training, your need to prove yourself, your fear of failure, all meaningless. Only hunger matters. Only feeding matters. And feeding never ends. Rachel's finger found the trigger. She fired 3 times. Center mass, the way she'd been trained. The shots cracked loud in the cold air, echoes swallowed by snow. The bullets hit. She saw them hit. Saw the Wendigo's chest cavity puncture. Saw nothing. No blood. No reaction. The holes sealed themselves immediately, ice crystallizing in the wounds, flesh reforming. The Wendigo laughed, sound like bones breaking in frost. This is my domain, it said. My season. You cannot kill winter. Cannot kill hunger. Cannot kill what has never truly lived. I am older than your park, older than your rangers, older than your nation. I was here when indigenous peoples learned to fear me, when they created taboos against cannibalism because they had seen what becomes of those who feed on their own. I am the reason winter is feared, the reason starvation drives madness, the reason hunger feels like it comes from outside rather than inside. The 7 changed victims circled closer. Lucas was among them, face tortured with remaining consciousness, trying to fight through the transformation. His mouth moved, forming words. Run, please run, she's too strong, she's... The Wendigo backhanded him casually, sent him flying 30 feet into a tree. Lucas hit with sound of breaking wood and didn't get up. Rachel ran. Not tactical retreat, blind panic, 3 months of training evaporating under terror that bypassed rational thought entirely. She ran through the thermal basin, through fog and blizzard, her headlamp beam bouncing wildly, GPS forgotten, direction meaningless. Behind her came the whistling, harmonized and patient predators that didn't need to hurry, because cold and exhaustion would do their work. She lasted maybe 4 minutes before her boot caught on hidden root, and she went down hard, face first into snow. The impact knocked her goggles askew, filled her balaclava with ice, drove the wind from her lungs. Rachel rolled, tried to rise, found her left ankle wasn't cooperating, sprained or broken, impossible to tell. The whistling stopped. Silence filled the space where pursuit should be. Just wind, just snow, just Rachel's ragged breathing. She fumbled her headlamp back into position, scanned the fog. Empty. Nothing. No figures, no movement, no sign of the Wendigo or its victims. Rachel's radio crackled. Patel? Jesus Christ, Patel, where are you? Your GPS beacon activated. We've got your position but can't reach you in these conditions. Status report. Dale Morrison's voice. Real, human, angry, but concerned. Rachel's voice cracked. I found Webb, he's changed. There's something out here, something that... Patel, you're hypothermic. You're experiencing confusion. Stay where you are. Activate your emergency bivy. We'll reach you as soon as weather allows. I'm not confused. I'm not hypothermic. There's... Static swallowed her words. When it cleared, Dale was speaking, but not to her. Exhibiting symptoms consistent with severe exposure, possible psychotic break. The radio died, battery frozen or something else, Rachel couldn't tell. She activated her emergency bivy, the reflective shelter unfurling from its compression sack. Getting inside took 3 tries with hands that barely functioned, fingers so cold she couldn't feel whether she was gripping anything. Once inside, the bivy trapped her body heat, temperature climbing from lethal to merely terrible. Rachel lay in the cramped space, ankle throbbing, and tried to think rationally. She'd seen something, multiple somethings. Lucas transformed. 7 other victims, the Wendigo. All of it impossible, but all of it witnessed. Or had she? Hypothermia caused hallucinations. Extreme cold triggered altered mental states. 3 months in Yellowstone. Her first real winter. First real exposure to -40 conditions. Maybe she'd broken. Maybe her urban California background had left her vulnerable in ways she hadn't recognized. But the hunger. She could still feel it. Hollow ache in her stomach that her emergency food bars didn't touch. She ate 3, mechanically, tasting nothing, and the hunger remained. Hours passed. The blizzard continued. Rachel dozed, woke, checked her Garmin. Still functioning, still showing her position, still marking Lucas's last coordinates a quarter-mile away. Her phone showed 11:23 a.m. She'd been out here 8 hours. Her ankle had swollen inside her boot, probably sprained at minimum. A sound outside the bivy. Crunching. Footsteps in snow. Rachel froze, hand going to her pistol. "Patel, you in there?" Dale's voice, muffled but recognizable. She unzipped the bivy. Dale Morrison stood in marginally improved visibility. The blizzard had weakened to heavy snow. Wearing full winter gear, snowmobile visible behind him. "Thank Christ," he said, kneeling. "What the hell were you thinking coming out here solo? You have any idea?" He stopped, seeing her face. "Jesus, you look terrible. Can you walk?" "Ankle's injured." "Dale, listen, Webb is out here, but he's not. He's changed. There's something in this area. Something that..." "We found Webb," Dale interrupted. 2 hours ago. He'd sheltered in the old weather station, rode out the storm. Dehydrated, some frostbite, but he'll be fine. Whatever you saw out here, it wasn't him. Rachel's mind refused to process that. "No. I saw him. I touched him. He spoke to me. He..." Hypothermia causes vivid hallucinations, especially Patel, in extreme cold. You've been out here in -40 temperatures for 8 hours with minimal experience. You're lucky to be alive. You're lucky I didn't find you frozen to death. He helped her to the snowmobile, supported her weight when her ankle buckled. The ride back took 40 minutes, Dale driving carefully through terrain that looked completely different in marginal daylight. Rachel saw no thermal basin, no spiral-stripped trees, no sign of what she'd witnessed. At the ranger station, paramedics treated her for stage 2 frostbite on 3 fingers, sprained ankle, moderate dehydration. Psychological evaluation was scheduled for the following day. Dale sat with her in the medical bay, expression somewhere between anger and relief. "Look," he said quietly. "I get it. You wanted to prove yourself. Wanted to show you could handle Yellowstone winters. But this isn't San Diego, Patel. This is serious country. People die out here. I've lost friends to this park, and rookies who think they need to be heroes just make it worse." "I saw something," Rachel insisted. "Multiple somethings. The incident reports. The pattern." "The incident reports show people getting lost in blizzards," Dale said, tone patient but firm. "Getting disoriented. Succumbing to hypothermia. You found a pattern because your brain wanted to find one. Because you wanted there to be something you could solve. Something that would make you look competent. But there's no mystery here, Rachel. Just wilderness being wilderness, just winter being winter. They sent her home for 3 days mandatory rest. Rachel spent them reviewing what she'd seen, what she'd experienced, trying to reconcile the impossible with the rational. Had it been hallucination? Cold-induced psychosis? Had she imagined everything? But her fingers still showed faint grooves, pressure marks from something touching her face, and the hunger hadn't fully left. She found herself eating constantly, never satisfied, always slightly hollow. On the 4th day, cleared to return to duty, Rachel volunteered for the archives again. This time, she went deeper into the records, pulling files from the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. The disappearances went back further than 14 years. Much further. She found references to Shoshone oral traditions about the Lamar Valley, about it being forbidden territory in winter. Found a 1927 Park Service memo about unusually aggressive wildlife behavior in the area during January and February. Found a journal entry from an early explorer, 1887, describing trees stripped in spiral patterns and hearing whistling and blizzards that sounded almost human. The pattern went back a century, maybe longer, and Lucas Webb, supposedly recovered, supposedly fine, had been placed on medical leave. No visitors, no communication, just a brief note in his file. Subject experiencing extreme appetite dysregulation, requesting psychiatric evaluation for possible eating disorder. Rachel sat alone in the archives at 2 a.m., almost exactly where she'd been 4 nights ago, and pulled up the satellite imagery again. The thermal basin, the spiral-stripped trees. They were there, visible from orbit, undeniable. She zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. In the center of the clearing, barely visible, 7 figures stood in a circle. 8, when she counted carefully. One of them might have been wearing ranger uniform. Rachel saved the image, encrypted it, backed it up 3 times. Then she opened a new document and began typing. Not an incident report, those would be dismissed, filed as confusion from hypothermia exposure. A research paper. Academic documented, cross-referencing folklore with incident patterns. Environmental conditions with disappearance dates. If she couldn't make people believe through direct testimony, maybe she could make them believe through data. Through patterns too clear to ignore. The Wendigo was real. It hunted Yellowstone's backcountry during winter. It transformed its victims, trapped them in hunger that never ended. And it would continue unless someone understood what they were facing. Rachel Patel had 3 months of experience, but she'd seen what the veterans hadn't, had survived what the veterans couldn't, and she would make them understand, even if they dismissed her as a rookie who'd had a psychotic break in the cold. Because next January, during the new moon, someone else would hear whistling in the blizzard. Someone else would feel hunger that couldn't be satisfied. Someone else would become the 9th victim. Unless Rachel could stop it, she worked through the night, documenting everything, knowing it would likely cost her job but unable to do anything else. Outside, snow fell softly, temperature dropping to -35. In the Lamar Valley backcountry, something ancient and eternally hungry waited for its season to come again, and Rachel Patel, rookie ranger with 3 months' experience, began planning how to fight a war against winter itself. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Lisa Hoffman buried her partner 3 years ago in Minnesota. She came to Yellowstone to escape the memories. Then she watched Madison Garcia crawl out of Norris Geyser Basin, skin blue, eyes white, moving like something that had forgotten it was supposed to be dead, and realized some graves don't hold. The transfer to Yellowstone had been Lisa's idea. Get away from the Great Lakes, from the forests where she and Rachel had hiked every autumn, from the apartment they'd shared for 6 years until the drunk driver on Highway 61 turned everything into before and after. Wyoming was different, volcanic, alien, a landscape that didn't remind her of anything except how small humans were against geological time. perfect for someone trying to forget. She'd been a ranger at Yellowstone for 11 months when Madison Garcia went missing. 22 years old, biology student from New Mexico, researching thermophilic bacteria in the park's hot springs. Madison had all the right permits, all the right safety equipment, and enough academic enthusiasm to make Lisa feel ancient at 34. They'd talked once at the Norris Ranger Station about Madison's research, about how life persisted in boiling acidic water that should kill everything, about extremophiles that thrived in conditions that would destroy ordinary organisms. "Life finds a way," Madison had said, grinning with the confidence of someone who'd never watched life end suddenly on a highway in the rain, even in impossible places. Lisa had smiled tightly and said something about following safety protocols. Madison had laughed and promised to be careful. That had been February 14th, 2003, Valentine's Day, 3 years exactly since Rachel died. Madison Garcia was reported missing on February 17th when she failed to check in after a permitted research trip to the Porcelain Basin thermal area. Her equipment was found at the basin's edge: sample containers, water testing kit, field notebook, with observations logged up to 4:47 p.m. No signs of struggle, no signs of anything except an absence, as if she'd simply evaporated into the sulfurous steam that rose constantly from the hot springs. Lisa led the search, though calling it a search felt optimistic. Yellowstone's thermal features were deadly. The water in some pools exceeded 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground was thin crust over superheated water and steam. Every year, tourists ignored warnings and ended up boiled alive or dissolved in acidic springs. If Madison had fallen through the crust or slipped into a hot spring, there might not be anything left to find. They searched anyway. SAR teams, thermal imaging, cadaver dogs that refused to go near certain areas, whining and pulling back on their leashes. 3 days of searching turned up nothing. On the 4th day, Lisa was doing a final sweep of the Porcelain Basin alone, against protocol, but she'd stopped caring much about self-preservation after Rachel died, when she saw it. Movement at the edge of a steam vent, something pulling itself up from the ground. Lisa's first thought was animal, maybe an elk that had fallen through the crust and was trying to escape. But the shape was wrong. Too upright, too human. Madison Garcia emerged from the steam like something being born, hands clawing at the mineral-crusted earth, pulling herself up from a fissure that hadn't existed in the previous day's survey. Her skin had the blue-gray color of cyanosis, lips dark purple, hair plastered to her skull with mineral deposits. Her eyes were completely white. No iris, no pupil, just milky opacity like cataracts. She wore the same clothes she'd disappeared in, but they hung loose on a frame that looked simultaneously emaciated and swollen. Lisa stood frozen, her radio falling from her hand. This wasn't possible. Madison had been missing for 4 days in sub-zero February temperatures. Even if she'd found shelter, which didn't exist in the thermal basin, hypothermia would have killed her within hours, and people didn't crawl out of the ground. Didn't move like that, joints bending wrong, head tilted at an angle that should have meant a broken neck. Madison's head turned toward Lisa with mechanical precision. The white eyes stared, unblinking. Her mouth opened, revealing teeth stained black, and she spoke in a voice like gravel scraping over bone. Lisa Hoffman, 34 years old, ranger, widow. She died on Valentine's Day. You think of her every morning. You dream of the accident. You wish you'd been in the car. Lisa's legs gave out. She hit the ground hard, mineral crust cracking under her knees. How did Madison know about Rachel? Lisa had told no one at Yellowstone, had kept her grief private, professional, buried as deep as she could manage. "I know because the dead know," Madison said, taking a step forward. Her foot left a print in the mineral crust, not a normal footprint, but something deeper, as if she weighed far more than her frame suggested. "I know because I've been where the dead go. I've seen them. She's there. Rachel, she's still there." Lisa's training screamed at her to call for backup, to approach this as a medical emergency, to treat Madison as a hypothermia victim suffering from delirium. But her instincts, the ones she'd learned to trust after 11 months in a landscape that killed casually and often, told her this wasn't medical. This was something else. "What happened to you?" Lisa managed to ask, her voice barely audible over the hiss of steam vents. "I fell through," Madison said, still advancing with that wrong, mechanical gait. "Fell through the crust into the hot spring. It should have killed me. The heat, the acid, should have dissolved me like it dissolves everything. But it didn't, because something else was down there. Something old. It grabbed me, held me, changed me." Lisa forced herself to stand, backing away slowly. Madison followed, closing the distance with steps that seemed to cover more ground than they should. Lisa's hand found her belt, searching for her radio, but it was on the ground where she'd dropped it. "There are old places," Madison continued, her white eyes never blinking. "Places where the world is thin, where heat and pressure break through from below. The Norse knew. They called beings like me Draugr, the Again Walkers, the dead who return. We guard the thin places. We punish those who disturb what should remain buried." Lisa's back hit a boulder. She was trapped between Madison and a boiling hot spring that bubbled ominously behind her, steam rising in thick clouds. The temperature here was dangerous even without the thermal features. The air itself could burn lungs. "I disturbed nothing," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just looking for you. SR. We've been searching." "You disturbed your grief," Madison interrupted. "You came here to bury it, to forget her. But the dead don't forget, and they don't let go. Rachel is waiting. She wants you to remember. She wants you to join her." Madison's hand shot out, impossibly fast, grabbing Lisa's wrist. The skin was cold, despite having emerged from boiling water, cold like meat from a freezer, and the grip was crushing. Lisa felt bones grinding together, felt something wrong in Madison's hand. Too many joints, fingers that bent in too many places. "You'll see her soon," Madison said. "I'll take you where I went, into the heat, into the earth, where the dead gather around the world's warm heart. You'll burn and you'll change and you'll understand that death isn't an ending. It's a threshold, and some of us come back to show others the way." Lisa's free hand found her belt knife, a Gerber multi-tool she'd carried since her first ranger posting. She flipped it open and drove the blade into Madison's arm. The knife sank in easily, meeting no resistance, as if Madison's flesh was rotten despite appearing solid. But Madison didn't flinch, didn't react, just kept pulling Lisa toward the hot spring, toward the water that steamed and bubbled with temperatures that would strip flesh from bone. "Iron doesn't stop us," Madison said. "Fire made us. Heat forged us. The old rituals knew. The Norse burned their dead to prevent Draugr, but no one burns anymore. You buried Rachel in the cold ground. She's still there, waiting, growing strong." The implication hit Lisa like a physical blow. Rachel, in her grave in Minnesota. If what Madison was saying was true, if the dead could return, could become these things, then Rachel might be... "No," Lisa said, more to herself than to Madison. "Rachel's at peace, she's gone. This is trauma, or hypothermia, or I'm having a breakdown." "Denial," Madison said, pulling Lisa closer to the hot spring's edge. "You've been in denial for 3 years, but the dead are patient. They wait in the cold earth or the hot stone, and eventually everyone joins them. Some of us just come back first." Lisa's boot heel caught on the rim of the hot spring. She could feel the heat now, incredible and immediate, radiating up through the thin crust. One more step and she'd go in, would experience what Madison claimed to have survived, would find out if the dead really waited in the superheated water, or if she'd just die screaming like the tourists who ignored the warnings. A sound behind them. Footsteps. Multiple. Running. SAR team responding to Lisa's last known position when she'd failed to check in. Madison's head swiveled with that mechanical precision, white eyes focusing on the approaching rangers. "They'll try to save you," Madison said. "They'll fail. There are more of us than you know. Every thermal death feeds us. Every body dissolved in the hot springs joins us. Yellowstone is a graveyard, Ranger Hoffman. A graveyard that doesn't let its dead rest. Madison released Lisa's wrist and turned toward the approaching rangers. Lisa saw her chance and ran, circling away from the hot spring, her wrist throbbing where Madison had gripped it. Behind her, she heard voices, her colleagues calling her name, confusion as they encountered Madison, questions about her condition. Then screaming, not pain screaming, but terror screaming, the sound of people confronting something their minds couldn't process. Lisa didn't look back. She ran until her lungs burned, until she reached the parking area where the SAR vehicles were clustered. She grabbed her radio from the dash of her truck and called it in. Multiple officer emergency at Norris Geyser Basin. Need all available units and medical immediately. Hostile individual at scene. Officers down or in danger. The response was chaos. Dispatch trying to get details. Units scrambling. Confusion about what hostile individual meant in a national park context. Lisa sat in her truck, watching the steam rise from the thermal basins in the distance, and waited for backup that might not matter. They found 2 rangers dead at the Porcelain Basin. Both had fallen or been pushed into hot springs. Their bodies were partially dissolved, identifiable only by their uniforms and equipment. Madison Garcia was gone, vanished back into the thermal features. The official report listed it as a tragic accident, 2 rangers responding to a search and getting too close to unstable ground. Madison was presumed dead, another victim of Yellowstone's thermal features. But Lisa knew better. She'd seen Madison's eyes, had felt the wrongness in her grip, had heard the words about Rachel waiting in the cold ground. Lisa requested a transfer the next day, was granted it within a week. She moved to Death Valley to heat and dryness and desert where there were no thermal features. No thin places where the earth opened up to whatever waited below. The nightmare started a month after leaving Yellowstone. Not dreams about Madison or the dead rangers, but dreams about Rachel. Dreams where Rachel climbed out of her grave in Minnesota, skin blue-gray, eyes white, moving with that same mechanical wrongness. Dreams where Rachel spoke in that gravel-over-bone voice. You left me in the cold ground. I'm still here, still waiting, growing strong. Lisa called the cemetery in Minnesota, asked if Rachel's grave had been disturbed. The groundskeeper laughed. Who would disturb a 3-year-old grave? Everything was fine. The grave was undisturbed, the headstone intact. Lisa thanked him and hung up, not reassured at all, because she'd learned something in Yellowstone that her training hadn't prepared her for. Some dead don't need their graves disturbed to return. Some wait patiently in the cold or the heat, gathering strength until those who loved them couldn't forget them anymore. And some places, thermal basins, thin spots where the world cracked open, were doorways they could use to come back. Lisa never returned to Yellowstone, never returned to Minnesota. She moved from park to park, always requesting transfers after a few months, unable to settle anywhere that felt like it might have thin places. She stopped visiting Rachel's grave, stopped looking at photographs, tried to forget, knowing that forgetting might be the only thing that kept Rachel from climbing out of the ground. But on February 14th every year, Valentine's Day, the anniversary, Lisa would wake to find mineral deposits on her pillow, white crusts that smelled of sulfur and looked exactly like the formations that covered everything in Yellowstone's thermal basins. And she'd know that Madison had been right. The dead knew. The dead remembered. And the dead were patient. Some graves don't hold. Some grief is a beacon calling the dead back. And some rangers learn too late that the wilderness they're supposed to protect has its own ideas about who belongs to it, living or dead. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The footprints changed species halfway across the canyon floor. Rachel Patel knelt in the red sand, her Nikon D7000 documenting what shouldn't be possible. The tracks began as coyote, 4-toed claw marks distinct, the gait pattern unmistakable to anyone with tracking experience. She'd been following them for 300 yards through the fiery furnace section of Arches National Park, hoping they'd lead to Madison Garcia, the hiker who'd vanished 6 days ago. But 50 yards from the balanced rock formation, the prints changed. Mid-stride, without transition, they became human. Barefoot, adult-sized, but the stride length was wrong, too long, suggesting something that moved in ways human legs didn't. And then, another 20 yards later, they changed again. Into something Rachel's brain refused to categorize. Too large for coyote, wrong shape for human, with additional digits that suggested a hand more than a foot. The impressions were deep, as if whatever made them was far heavier than either animal or human should be. Rachel took 17 photographs, checked her Garmin GPS map 62's, coordinates N38 dig 4033, W109 dig 3347, and tried to remember what her SAR training said about impossible evidence. Nothing. Because evidence was supposed to be possible. It was October 2012, peak season nearly over, the desert cooling from summer's brutal temperatures to something merely oppressive. Rachel had worked arches for 4 years now, transferred from Glacier National Park after. She didn't think about after. Didn't think about the avalanche, about Marcus, about the way his voice had cut off mid-transmission while she'd been a mile away, unable to help, unable to save the partner she'd loved. That was 18 months ago. She'd left Montana because the snow triggered panic attacks, because every white slope looked like the one that had buried Marcus. Utah was supposed to be different. Desert and rock, no avalanches, just heat and tourists and simple rescues. Except this wasn't simple. Madison Garcia, 28, solo backpacker from Albuquerque, experienced desert hiker, Navajo heritage, had done this park dozens of times. She'd set out 6 days ago on a permitted overnight trip through the backcountry, expected back 3 days ago. Her car remained at the Devil's Garden trailhead, her emergency contact growing frantic. Rachel had volunteered for the search because everyone else was dealing with a multi-vehicle accident on the scenic drive. Because she needed to prove she could still do this work, could still handle SAR operations without falling apart. Because Madison Garcia deserved someone looking for her, even if that someone was broken. The Utah sun hammered down despite October's calendar promise of autumn. 103 degrees at 11 a.m., the sandstone radiating stored heat. The air so dry Rachel's lips cracked despite constant water intake. She carried 4 liters in her camelback, the department-issue Motorola XTS 5000 radio on her belt, her personal spot satellite messenger clipped to her pack. And now she was looking at tracks that violated biology, following them deeper into the fiery furnace, a maze of narrow canyons and fins where tourists regularly got lost, despite the guided tours. Rachel keyed her radio. Base Ranger Patel. I've found tracks possibly related to Garcia disappearance. Following them east into the furnace, coordinates logged on GPS. Static, then dispatch. Tom's voice steady and professional. Copy that, Rachel. Weather forecast shows possible thunderstorms by 1600. Don't get caught in a flash flood zone. Understood. Check-in scheduled for 1300 hours. She signed off and continued tracking. The canyon walls rose around her. Entrada sandstone stained rust red and cream, twisted into formations that looked organic, alive. The Navajo called this area something in their language. Rachel had heard Madison mention it once during a volunteer training session. Something about skinwalkers, about places where the boundary between human and animal grew thin. Rachel didn't believe in folklore. She believed in evidence, in training, in following protocols. But she also believed that Marcus's last words had been, "Something's wrong, Rach, the snow is..." Before the transmission ended, and the avalanche took him. Believing in evidence hadn't brought him back. The tracks led into a narrow slot canyon, barely 3 feet wide, the walls rising 60 feet on either side. Rachel photographed the entrance, protocol required documentation, and squeezed through sideways, her pack scraping sandstone. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees, blessed shade finally. But the air felt wrong, too still, too thick, like something was using it to breathe. The tracks continued, still in that impossible shifting pattern. Coyote, human, other, coyote, human, other. Rachel found Madison's first cairn marker 200 yards in. The rocks were stacked deliberately, with a strip of red fabric, Madison's bandana, according to the missing person report, tied around the top stone. But written in the sand beside it in careful letters, "Turn back. Not safe." It knows. Madison's handwriting. Rachel had seen it on the permit forms. But when had she written this? Why hadn't she turned back herself? Rachel photographed the cairn and the message. Her hands were shaking slightly. Professional detachment said document and continue. Survival instinct said listen to the warning and retreat. Her radio crackled with static, then a voice. "Rachel, can you hear me?" Marcus's voice. Impossible, wrong, but unmistakably his voice, the slight Boston accent, the way he rounded his R's. "This is Ranger Patel," Rachel said, keeping her voice steady through force of will. "Identify yourself." "It's me, Rach. I'm hurt. I need help. Please, I'm—" Static cut through the transmission. "Trapped, and it's getting dark, and I can hear something." Rachel's finger hovered over the transmit button. Marcus was dead. Had been dead for 18 months. This wasn't him. Couldn't be him. But what if— "What's your location?" she heard herself ask. "I don't—" The voice broke up. "Old Arch near—" Static. "Please hurry." The radio went dead. Completely dead. Display dark. Unresponsive to any button press. Rachel tried her spot messenger. Also dead. Her phone. No signal normally this deep, but at least it should show the home screen, black and unresponsive. Just like in the avalanche. In those final moments, all communications had failed simultaneously, as if something had wanted to isolate Marcus before. Rachel forced herself to breathe. In through nose, out through mouth, the technique her therapist had taught her for managing panic attacks. This wasn't an avalanche. This was a desert canyon. Different situation, different variables, except the same wrongness, the same feeling of something violating the rules, of reality bending in ways it shouldn't. Movement caught her peripheral vision. Rachel spun, one hand going to the canister of bear spray on her belt, stupid in the desert but old habits from Montana, and saw nothing. Just sandstone and shadow and the narrow passage of the slot canyon. But she'd seen something, pale, low to the ground, moving with an animal's fluidity. "Madison Garcia?" Rachel called out. "I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help." Her voice echoed off the canyon walls, came back distorted, wrong, as if something was speaking under her words, using her voice but with different sounds, different meaning. The thing appeared at the far end of the visible passage. At first, Rachel's brain cataloged it as coyote, the size roughly matched, the movement pattern canine. But then it stood up. Rose on its hind legs in a way that bent wrong, joints moving at angles that shouldn't exist, until it stood upright on two legs that were too long, too thin, ending in feet that were neither human nor animal. Its face, God, its face was the worst part. Coyote features, but wrong, flattened, with too much intelligence in the eyes. And those eyes weren't coyote yellow. They were human brown. Madison Garcia's eyes, according to her driver's license photo. The thing opened its mouth, coyote teeth in a nearly human jaw, and spoke with Madison's voice. "Turn back, Rachel. It's already too late for me. Don't let it take you too." Then it dropped to all fours and ran, movement impossible for either animal or human, flowing around corners that should have required slowing down. Rachel ran after it, stupid, unprofessional, against every protocol. But she'd failed Marcus, had been too slow, too far away. She wouldn't fail again. Wouldn't let another person disappear into wrongness while she stood by and documented. The slot canyon opened into a wider space, an amphitheater carved by ancient water, and there, in the center, was Madison Garcia's campsite. Tent still standing, backpack propped against a rock, everything organized and intact as if she'd just stepped away for water. But the sand around the camp showed tracks everywhere, dozens of them, all in that same impossible shifting pattern. Coyote to human to other, circling, closing in, a hunting pattern that suggested intelligence and patience. Rachel approached the tent slowly. Madison? Can you hear me? The tent's zipper was closed from the inside. Rachel grabbed the pull and froze. From inside the tent, Madison's voice, "Don't open it, please, I'm not me anymore." "I'm here to help," Rachel said, though her hands were shaking. "Let me see what's wrong. I can call for medical." "My radio doesn't work. My phone doesn't work. Nothing electronic works around." The voice broke. "Around what I'm becoming. I don't understand." The Navajo know. Madison's voice was cracking now, human and animal sounds mixing. "My grandmother warned me. Don't walk alone in certain places. Don't accept gifts from strangers. Don't—" A sound between sob and growl. "Don't violate the old rules." "What rules?" "Madison, I need you to explain." "I was offered power." The voice was changing, deepening, taking on harmonics that hurt to hear. "To move between shapes, to run as the animals run, to—" Silence, then words that sounded more animal than human. "To hunt." "Who offered you that?" "Not who. What?" Something moved inside the tent, but the shadow it cast on the fabric was wrong. Too many limbs, too fluid. There are places where the old things still have power. Places where if you accept what they offer, you become... The tent unzipped from inside. What emerged was wearing Madison's hiking clothes, had Madison's face, but moved in ways that were fundamentally wrong. The joints bent backward when they should bend forward. The head rotated too far. The eyes, still human brown, but with something else looking through them. "Yenaldlushi," the thing said, voice now completely inhuman. "Skinwalker," the Navajo word for what I am now, what I chose to become. Rachel backed away, hand finding the bear spray. "You didn't choose this. Someone did something to you, I chose." The thing that had been Madison took a step forward, and its foot left a print that was coyote, human, and something else simultaneously. "I wanted to run faster, see farther, be stronger. The old thing in the deep canyon offered that gift. I accepted. Now I can't stop changing. Can't control what I become. There has to be a way to reverse. There's only one way." The Madison thing smiled, and its teeth were too sharp, too numerous. "Death, but even that might not be enough. Skinwalkers persist. In stories, in warnings, in the fear that keeps people from walking alone in certain places." Behind Rachel, she heard breathing. Wet, labored, too loud for any animal she recognized. She turned slowly. 3 more things stood at the canyon entrance, all wearing human form, all wrong in subtle ways, proportions off, movements too smooth, eyes too aware. They wore the decayed remnants of clothing from different eras, leather and denim from decades past, styles that hadn't been fashionable since the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. "We were all offered the gift," the closest one said, voice cracking between timbres. "We all accepted. Now we guard this place, keep others from making our mistake. By killing them." Rachel's voice was steady somehow, that combat calm she'd learned in SAR training taking over. "By scaring them away." The Madison thing moved closer. "But some don't scare. Some keep searching. Like you, Rachel Patel. Still looking for Marcus, still thinking if you save enough people you'll balance the equation. How do you know? We smell grief on you. Smell trauma. Smell the way you punish yourself with every rescue, hoping it'll be the one that makes up for the one you couldn't save." The thing tilted its head, coyote gesture in human form. "It won't. No amount of saving equals one loss. We know, we lost ourselves." The other skinwalkers were circling now, cutting off escape routes. Rachel's training said assess exits, determine best path, act decisively. But the canyon offered no good exits, narrow passages on all sides, and the things moved faster than human, more efficiently than animal. "I'm not accepting any gifts," Rachel said, trying to edge toward the widest passage. "I'm just looking for Madison Garcia. Officially, for the record, I'm recovering a missing person." "You found her." The Madison thing gestured at itself. "What's left of her?" The question is, what happens now? Now I report her found, call for medical evacuation, and with what radio? The closest skinwalker, it wore an old Park Service uniform from maybe 30 years ago, name tag too faded to read, gestured at Rachel's dead equipment. We don't let signals out, can't risk exposure, can't risk others coming to investigate. People know I'm here. When I don't check in, they'll send search teams, who will warn away. The old ranger thing smiled, and Rachel saw too many teeth. Same as always, same as we've done for decades. This place has always had disappearances, always had stories. The Navajo know to avoid it. Others learn too slowly. Rachel's hand found her bear spray. I'm not staying here. Madison, or whatever you are now. I came to find you. I found you. That's enough. Is it? The Madison thing moved faster than sight, suddenly inches away, breath hot and wrong on Rachel's face. Or do you need to save me? Make up for Marcus? Fix what you think you broke? Get away from me. He called for you, didn't he? The voice was Marcus's now, that Boston accent perfect. At the end. Rach, the snow is moving wrong, Rach, I think. And then silence. And you couldn't reach him, couldn't save him. Could you? Rachel sprayed. The bear spray caught the Madison thing full in the face, and it recoiled, shrieking. A sound that was part human scream, part coyote yip, part something else entirely. The other skinwalkers lunged forward, but Rachel was already moving, muscle memory from 100 mountain rescues driving her toward the narrowest passage, the one that favored human form over animal flexibility. She squeezed through a crack barely 18 inches wide, sandstone scraping her arms and pack. Behind her, the things were changing, bones cracking and reforming, becoming something that could follow. Rachel ran through passages she didn't remember entering, taking turns by instinct and desperation. The canyon system was a maze, each turn looking like the last, every wall identical red sandstone. Her GPS was dead, her compass spinning uselessly, but she followed the sun angle, kept moving toward what she thought was west, toward the park road. From every direction, she heard voices, Marcus's voice calling for help, her mother's voice asking why she wasn't coming home, her own voice warning her to turn back. Rachel ignored them all, focused on breathing, on placing feet carefully despite speed, on the basics of desert survival. Don't fall, don't break an ankle, don't stop moving. She burst out of the fiery furnace an hour before sunset, emerging onto the main park road where a tour bus was disgorging elderly tourists. They stared at Rachel, covered in red dust, gasping, wild-eyed. But she'd never been happier to see RV-driving, camera-wielding visitors in her life. Rachel stumbled to the bus and grabbed her personal phone from her pocket. Somehow, out of the furnace, it powered on. Battery at 12% but functional. She dialed the ranger station. Rachel? Tom's voice, concerned. You missed your check-in by 3 hours. Where are you? Fiery furnace west entrance. I need backup. I found... What could she say? Evidence related to Madison Garcia. And something else, something dangerous. Stay put. I'm sending units now. Rachel sat on the roadside barrier while tourists took selfies with balanced rock in the background. The normalcy was surreal. Families eating picnic dinners, children chasing lizards, retirees consulting maps. All while a few hundred yards into the canyon system, things that wore human shapes but weren't human anymore circled and hunted and kept their terrible secret. The Park Service arrived 20 minutes later. 3 rangers, a medic, Tom himself looking worried. Rachel gave her statement, found tracks, followed them, discovered evidence of Madison Garcia's presence, experienced equipment failure and disorientation, managed to exit the maze. She didn't mention the skinwalkers. Didn't mention voices or transformations or things that violated biology. Who would believe her? She'd sound traumatized, unstable, unfit for duty. Maybe she was. They sent in a full search team the next day, guided by Rachel's GPS coordinates, found Madison's campsite, her equipment, everything intact. But no Madison, no tracks, no evidence of the things Rachel had seen. The official report listed Madison Garcia as missing, presumed lost in the wilderness, likely fell in an unmapped area and succumbed to exposure or injury. Case left open, but resources redirected to active searches. Rachel was put on administrative leave, standard protocol after a traumatic search operation. Mandatory psych evaluation, which she failed spectacularly when she tried to describe what she'd seen. The therapist was kind, professional, diagnosed acute stress reaction exacerbated by previous trauma. She wasn't wrong. Rachel was traumatized, but not delusional. Rachel resigned from the Park Service 6 weeks later. Couldn't go back to the desert, couldn't look at red sandstone without seeing those tracks changing mid-stride, couldn't hear coyotes without remembering Madison's voice coming from that wrong-shaped mouth. She moved to Phoenix, tried office work, tried anything that kept her away from wilderness and the things that lived in unmapped places. But the dreams persisted. Marcus calling from the avalanche, Madison offering her the gift of shape-shifting, the old skinwalkers circling closer and promising she could save everyone if she just accepted the power. In 2014, 2 years after Arches, Rachel read a news article, another disappearance in the fiery furnace. A young man, this time experienced hiker, vanished without trace. Search teams found his campsite intact, equipment untouched, no sign of struggle or accident. Just another statistic, another file left open. Another person lost to whatever walked between species in that maze of red stone. Rachel wanted to call someone, warn them, tell them the truth. But who would listen? The Park Service had already decided she was unreliable, trauma-affected, unstable. So she did the only thing she could, started a blog. Anonymous, careful, never mentioning specific locations or entities by name. Just stories about places where things weren't quite right, where old rules still applied, where accepting gifts from the wilderness came with prices too high to pay. She wrote about skinwalkers in general terms, Navajo legends, cultural significance, the importance of respecting indigenous warnings. She wrote about other disappearances, patterns she'd noticed in park records, clusters of missing persons in specific locations. Some readers called her crazy. Others shared their own stories. Rangers who'd seen things, hikers who'd heard voices, survivors who'd barely made it out of places where reality bent. Rachel stopped being surprised at how many stories there were. How many people had experienced wrongness in the wilderness and stayed silent because who would believe them? She never went back to Arches, never walked in desert canyons again. But sometimes, on quiet nights in her Phoenix apartment, Rachel heard coyotes yipping in the distance. And she wondered if they were really coyotes or if they were something else, someone else, who'd accepted the gift and lost themselves to the shape-shifting hunger. She wondered if Madison was still out there, still circling the fiery furnace, still trying to warn other hikers away from the old thing in the deep canyon that offered impossible power. She wondered if she'd been lucky to escape, or if escaping just meant carrying the knowledge alone. The burden of truth that no one else wanted to hear. The Navajo had words for these things. Ye nald lushi, skinwalker. They had rules. Don't go certain places alone. Don't accept gifts from strangers. Don't speak the names of the transformed. Rachel learned those rules too late for Madison. Learned them after failing Marcus in a different wilderness, with a different kind of monster. But she learned them. And she shares them, anonymously, hoping someone somewhere will listen. Will turn back when they find tracks that change species. Will run when they hear voices mimicking the dead. Will refuse the gift when it's offered, no matter how appealing the promise of power. Because Rachel Patel knows the truth that the missing person reports don't capture. Some disappearances aren't accidents. Some are choices made in desperation, or curiosity or grief. Choices to become something other than human, something that runs faster and sees farther, and never dies, but also never rests. The desert keeps its secrets. The canyons hide their transformed, and somewhere in the fiery furnace, things that were once human still circle and hunt and guard the place where reality bends enough to offer terrible gifts to those desperate enough to accept them. Rachel survived. But survival just means living with the knowledge of what she couldn't save, what she couldn't prevent, What walks in the wilderness wearing familiar faces and speaking in stolen voices? The skinwalkers are patient. They've waited decades, centuries, perhaps longer. They can wait for Rachel Patel to forget her fear, to convince herself it was all trauma and delusion, to return to the wilderness she once loved. But Rachel won't forget. Can't forget. Marcus taught her that some losses can't be recovered. The skinwalkers taught her that some transformations can't be undone. So she stays in the city, writes her anonymous warnings, and listens to distant coyotes that might not be coyotes at all. And she never, ever accepts gifts from strangers. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. James Whitmore found the symbols carved into his daughter's photograph, the one he carried in his ranger jacket, 3 days before Austin Fletcher vanished. Sigils burned into the paper with precision no human hand could achieve, surrounding Emma's face like a warning or a claim. The photograph was recent, taken just 2 weeks ago during Emma's 8th birthday at their rental house in Orick. She was smiling, missing a front tooth, holding up the new binoculars James had bought her. "So I can be a ranger like you, Daddy," she'd said. James had laminated the photo and kept it in his jacket's inside pocket, close to his heart, something he could touch during long patrols to remember why he worked 50-hour weeks in a park 300 miles from home. His wife Sarah had been understanding when he'd taken the Redwood posting 18 months ago. They'd needed the money. Emma's medical bills from her childhood leukemia had drained their savings despite insurance. The cancer was in remission now, but the debt remained. Sarah worked as a nurse in San Francisco, while Emma stayed with Sarah's mother during the week. James drove home every Friday night, spent 48 hours with his family, then drove back Sunday evening. It was temporary, just until they could pay down the debt, just until they could afford to be together again. The symbols appeared on March 15, 2018. James had reached into his jacket for the photo during a routine patrol and felt heat, actual heat, like the paper was burning. He'd pulled it out quickly, expecting fire, but the lamination was cool to the touch. The damage was already done. 7 symbols, perfectly circular, burned through the lamination into the photograph itself. Each symbol was intricate, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, angles that seemed to shift when viewed directly. They surrounded Emma's face like a frame or a target. James had photographed the symbols with his iPhone and run a reverse image search. The results were scattered and disturbing. Islamic mystical texts, medieval grimoires, academic papers on Solomon's seals and binding rituals for jinn. The symbols weren't identical to anything he found, but they shared characteristics. Containment circles, binding marks, warnings against entities of smokeless fire. He told himself it was a prank, that someone at the ranger station had gotten into his locker. But the locker had been locked, and the symbols were burned, not drawn. And deep down, James had felt something he hadn't felt since Emma's diagnosis. Pure, primal fear. Not fear for himself, but fear that something was threatening his daughter. 3 days later, Austin Fletcher disappeared. Austin was a 26-year-old environmental activist from Portland, part of a group monitoring old-growth logging near the park boundaries. He'd been camping legally at Elk Prairie, documenting forest conditions for a lawsuit against timber companies. His tent was found on March 18th, still zipped shut from the inside, his camera and phone inside, but Austin gone. The tent fabric showed scorch marks, small burns in perfect geometric patterns, the same symbols that had appeared on James's photograph. James volunteered to lead the search immediately, not just because it was his job, but because he needed to understand what was happening. If these symbols connected to Emma somehow, if something was using them to mark targets, then he needed to find Austin Fletcher and figure out what they were dealing with. The search grid covered the ancient redwood groves north of Elk Prairie, trees so massive they created their own weather systems, fog condensing around trunks 50 feet in diameter. Some of these trees were over 2,000 years old, had been saplings when Rome fell. The Yurok and Tolowa people considered the groves sacred, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, James had heard the stories from tribal consultants, tales of forest spirits, of beings that lived in the trees and tested those who entered, of paths that led sideways into realms where human rules didn't apply. He dismissed the stories as cultural mythology, interesting but not literally true. Now he wasn't so sure. The search began at dawn on March 19th. James's team included 5 other rangers and 2 SAR specialists with cadaver dogs. The dogs acted strangely from the start, whining, pulling back from certain trails, refusing to enter specific groves even when commanded. One dog, a German shepherd named Max, who'd located bodies in 3 previous searches, lay down and wouldn't move when they reached the edge of the tall tree's grove. His handler tried everything, treats, commands, even carrying the dog, but Max went rigid, growling at something only he could see. "Never seen him do this," the handler said, frustrated. "He's trained to ignore distractions. Something's got him spooked." James felt it too. A pressure in the air, a weight that had nothing to do with humidity. The temperature in the grove was wrong, 10 degrees warmer than outside despite the dense canopy. The light had a strange quality, filtered through the redwood needles into something that wasn't quite green and wasn't quite gold. And the silence was oppressive. No birds, no insects, just the distant drip of condensation from the canopy and the team's breathing. They split into pairs to cover more ground. James partnered with Rachel Nguyen, a younger ranger who'd transferred from Yosemite 6 months ago. They took the northeast quadrant, following a creek that wound through the grove's heart. James checked his GPS every few minutes. Signal was weak under the canopy, but functional. His iPhone showed full battery, 4G connection, 11 unread texts from Sarah asking for updates. He opened the messages. The most recent was from 30 minutes ago. "Emma drew a picture at school today, trees with faces, said they were watching Daddy. Call me." James's hands went cold. He tried calling, but the connection failed despite showing 4 bars. He tried again. Nothing. Rachel was having the same problem. Her phone showed service but wouldn't connect calls or load data. "Cell towers must be down," she said, frustrated. "I had signal an hour ago." They continued deeper into the grove. The trees here were enormous, the largest redwoods in the park, some exceeding 350 feet in height. Walking among them felt like being inside a cathedral, columns of living wood supporting a ceiling of branches and sky. Beautiful, but increasingly wrong. The temperature kept rising, now 15 degrees warmer than it should be. James was sweating inside his ranger uniform despite the spring weather. Rachel stopped suddenly. "Do you smell smoke?" James did. Not wood smoke, but something else. Spices, incense, a sharp chemical smell like burning sulfur. The scent was coming from ahead, growing stronger as they advanced. They found Austin Fletcher's backpack hanging from a branch 20 feet off the ground. Not dropped or abandoned, but deliberately placed, hung by its straps with the precision of someone who'd climbed up specifically to leave it there. The backpack was scorched, the fabric blackened in patterns that matched the symbols on James's photograph and Austin's tent. "How did it get up there?" Rachel asked, staring at the smooth trunk. Redwoods had no lower branches. Their limbs started 100 feet up. No one could climb this tree without specialized equipment. "I don't know," James said, though he was starting to have theories he didn't want to voice. He pulled out his radio. "Base, this is Whitmore. We've located Fletcher's equipment. Requesting..." Static exploded from the radio, so loud James dropped it. But underneath the static was something else. A voice deep and resonant, speaking words that weren't English. Arabic maybe, or something older. The radio's speaker began to melt, plastic bubbling and dripping, smoke rising from the device. Rachel backed away, her own radio hissing with the same static. "What the hell?" The temperature spiked. James felt it like opening an oven door, a wall of heat that shouldn't exist in a temperate rainforest. The air shimmered, and for just a moment, James saw something between the trees. Not hiding, but existing slightly sideways from normal space. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, made of heat distortion and smoke, with eyes like burning coals. Then it was gone and the grove returned to its oppressive normality. "Did you see that?" Rachel whispered. James had. And he knew what it was, even though his rational mind rejected it. Jinn. The Arabic legends spoke of beings made from smokeless fire before humanity existed, entities with intelligence and free will who lived in parallel to the human world. Most jinn were indifferent to humans. Some were benevolent. But the Ifrit, the jinn of fire and wrath, were dangerous, territorial, and ancient. And one was here in the redwood groves, for reasons James didn't understand but desperately needed to discover. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, impossibly getting through when calls couldn't. "Emma's fever is 104. Hospital won't admit her yet, but it's rising. She keeps saying something is coming for you. James, I'm scared." The world tilted. Emma's cancer was in remission. She'd been healthy for 18 months. A fever this high meant infection, or worse, relapse. James needed to get home, needed to be with his daughter. But Austin Fletcher was missing, and whatever had taken him was still here, marking people with symbols, threatening James's family. "I need to get to a working phone," James said, his voice tight. "My daughter's sick." Rachel nodded. "Let's get back to base. Cell service might work closer to the highway." They turned to retrace their path. The grove looked different, not structurally. The trees were the same, but orientationally. The creek they'd followed ran the wrong direction. The trail markers were gone. James checked his GPS and felt his stomach drop. According to the device, they were 3 miles east of their actual position, in the middle of Redwood Creek, where there was nothing but water. "GPS is malfunctioning," he said, trying to keep panic from his voice. "We'll navigate by compass." He pulled out his backup compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on magnetic north. Rachel tried hers with the same result. "This isn't malfunction," Rachel said quietly. "This is something else." A sound rose from deeper in the grove. Not wind, not animals, but a voice, speaking Arabic, the words rolling like poetry or prayer. And beneath the Arabic, another sound, laughter, cruel and ancient. James made a decision. "We're getting out of here. Pick a direction and move fast. Don't stop for anything." They ran, not the cardinal direction they'd entered from, but simply away from the voice through the massive trees and thick undergrowth. James's lungs burned, his leg muscles screaming. Behind them, the voice followed, sometimes distant, sometimes close enough that James could feel breath on his neck, breath that smelled of cinnamon and burning cedar. They burst through a wall of ferns into a clearing that shouldn't exist. James had studied the park maps obsessively. There were no clearings in the tall trees grove, but here was one, perfectly circular, maybe 50 feet across, carpeted with strange flowers that glowed faintly in the filtered light. And in the center of the clearing stood Austin Fletcher. He was alive, but wrong. His skin had a reddish tint, like severe sunburn, and his eyes reflected light like an animal's. He stood perfectly still, arms at his sides, smiling with too many teeth. "Ranger Whitmore," Austin said, his voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "The father, the one who carries the marked child." "Where's Austin?" James demanded, though he knew the answer. This wasn't Austin anymore, or not only Austin. "The environmentalist sleeps," the thing wearing Austin said. "His body serves as vessel. He came seeking to protect the forest. We granted his wish. Now he is forest, and we are him. Fair trade." "What do you want?" James asked, positioning himself between the possessed Austin and Rachel. "Want?" The entity laughed. "We want nothing. We are. We have been since before your species walked upright. These trees are ours. We grew with them from saplings, will remain when they fall. You humans come with your saws and roads and noise, cutting the ancient wood, disturbing the old places. We remind you, some territories belong to beings older than nations." "The symbols," James said. "Why mark my daughter?" Austin's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Your daughter. We marked nothing of yours. We marked the photograph you carry. Paper, ink, human sentiment made physical. Easy to touch across the veil. But the child herself? The entity's smile widened. The child is marked by something else. Something that called to us, drew us to your bloodline. Sickness that burned through her once. It left traces. Ash in her soul. We smell it. Horror flooded through James. Emma's cancer. The chemotherapy that had saved her life had left something behind. Some spiritual residue that entities like this could sense. She wasn't sick again. She was being targeted because she'd been sick before. "Leave her alone," James said, his voice shaking with rage. "She's 8 years old. She's innocent." "Innocence is a human concept," the entity said. "We are neither good nor evil. We simply are, as fire is, as nature is. And nature does not forgive. Your species cuts our trees, drowns our realms in iron and concrete. We take what we can. Bodies to wear, lives to extinguish, terror to spread. The child is leverage. Return tomorrow at sunset. Come alone. Bring the photograph. We may negotiate her safety." "No," Rachel said suddenly. "We're not negotiating with whatever you are. We're taking Austin and leaving." She advanced toward the possessed man. James tried to stop her, but she was already moving, her hand reaching for Austin's arm to pull him away. The entity in Austin's body grabbed her wrist, and Rachel screamed. James saw her skin blister instantly, saw smoke rising from where the entity touched her. The temperature in the clearing spiked to unbearable levels. James felt his exposed skin burning, his lungs scorching with each breath. Rachel collapsed, her wrist blackened. Unconscious from pain, the entity released her and turned back to James. "Tomorrow, sunset, the photograph. Or we come for the child in her hospital bed while she burns with fever that no medicine can cure. Do you understand, Father?" James understood. He gathered Rachel in his arms. She was breathing but badly burned, and ran. The entity didn't follow. It stayed in the clearing, wearing Austin Fletcher's body like a suit, watching with eyes that were older than civilization. James found his way out somehow. The forest released him, the path straightening, the GPS resuming function just as he reached the trailhead. Backup arrived minutes later, alerted by the overdue check-in. Rachel was airlifted to the hospital in Eureka with second-degree burns and severe shock. The official report would list it as a thermal vent incident, despite there being no thermal features in coastal California. James drove to San Francisco without stopping, ignoring all protocols. Emma was in the ER when he arrived, Sarah's eyes red from crying. The fever had spiked to 105 before breaking suddenly at 6 p.m., exactly when James had fled the Grove. Emma was stable now, sleeping, but the doctors were running tests for infection sources. James sat beside his daughter's bed, holding her small hand, and made his decision. The entity wanted the photograph, said it was marked, could be used across the veil. Maybe destroying it would sever the connection, or maybe that was what the entity wanted, to get James alone in the Grove again without the protection the photograph somehow provided. He pulled out the burned, symbol-covered image. Emma's smiling face stared up at him through the geometric patterns. James had two choices: believe the entity and trade the photograph for his family's safety, or refuse and fight something he didn't understand with resources he didn't have. Sarah touched his shoulder. "What happened out there?" James wanted to lie to protect her from the truth. But they'd promised each other honesty after Emma's diagnosis. Lies didn't help in crisis. "Something old," he said quietly. "Something that doesn't follow the rules I know. It's threatening Emma, using her illness against her. I don't know how to fight it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The Yurok have a cultural liaison, Mrs. Patterson. She helped with Emma's naming ceremony last year. Maybe she knows stories." James had met Mrs. Patterson briefly, an elder in her 70s who served as bridge between the tribe and Park Service. He'd respected her, but never taken the spiritual aspects seriously. Now he called her at midnight, apologizing for the hour, and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. Then, Jinn. We have different names. Forest spirits, the ancient ones. But yes, they're real. The redwoods are old enough to be doorways. Some Jinn sleep in the old trees, wake when disturbed. Usually they just frighten loggers, make people lose their way. But if one is using a human body, making demands, that's rare. And dangerous. How do I stop it? James asked. You don't, Mrs. Patterson said bluntly. Jinn are older than humanity, made from God's fire before Adam was clay. You negotiate. You offer something it values more than terrorizing your family. Or, she paused. You find its name. True names have power over Jinn. Solomon bound them using their names. But learning a Jinn's true name requires access to knowledge most humans don't possess. Where would I find that knowledge? Here. Our people have stories, names passed down. If this Jinn has been in the redwoods long enough, we might know it. Bring the photograph. I'll call the elders. We meet tomorrow, noon, before you have to return at sunset. James met Mrs. Patterson and 3 tribal elders at the Yurok tribe's administrative building. He brought the photograph, watched as they examined the symbols with expressions that mixed recognition and fear. These are binding marks, one elder said. Not human-made. The Jinn marked this itself, creating a sympathetic link. It can see through this photograph, can touch whatever is in the image. Your daughter's face. It's a window. Can we close it? James asked desperately. Yes, Mrs. Patterson said. But not by destroying the photo. That would release the binding entirely, give the Jinn free access. Instead, we add symbols, counter-bindings, names of power that limit what the Jinn can do through this link. They worked for 2 hours, using ink made from sacred plants and ash from ceremonial fires, drawing symbols around the burns the Jinn had made. Each elder spoke prayers in Yurok and other languages James didn't recognize, layering protection over the photograph until Emma's face was barely visible through the geometric patterns. This will hold, Mrs. Patterson said finally. But the Jinn won't be pleased. It will want vengeance for the binding. You need to give it something else to focus on. Like what? The body it's wearing. Austin Fletcher. The man isn't dead. The Jinn said he sleeps. If you can break the possession, free him. The Jinn loses its anchor in the physical world. It returns to the trees, to sleep. How do I break possession? Mrs. Patterson pulled out a small leather pouch. Iron filings mixed with salt. Jinn can't touch iron. It grounds them, forces them back into fire form. Throw this at the possessed man, speak the Jinn's true name 3 times, and it must release him. You know its true name. We know a name, one of the elders said grimly. Our ancestors recorded it 200 years ago. A Jinn that lived in the grandfather trees that tested those who entered the groves. They called it Kararib, the binder. It marks what it claims, creates links to possess and control. Your photograph, Fletcher's tent, the pattern fits. James took the leather pouch and the photograph, now covered in protective symbols. He drove back to Redwood, arriving at the tall trees grove an hour before sunset. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind, just expectant silence. He found the clearing easily this time. The paths led him directly there, as if the forest wanted him to arrive. Austin Fletcher's body stood in the center, exactly where James had left it yesterday. The entity wearing Austin smiled as James approached. The father returns. Do you have the photograph? I have it, James said, holding it up, but modified. Your marks are bound now. You can't touch my daughter through this anymore. The entity's smile faded. Austin's eyes flared with inner fire. You brought tribal magic against us? Foolish. We are older than their prayers. Their symbols are crude chains we can break. Maybe, James said, but they'll hold long enough. And I know your name. Kararib, the binder. You've been here 200 years, marking and claiming and possessing. But Solomon's wisdom still holds power. I speak your true name 3 times, and you must release this man. The entity hissed, smoke rising from Austin's mouth. You dare? James threw the iron and salt mixture directly at Austin's chest and shouted, Kararib, Kararib, Kararib. The effect was immediate. Austin's body convulsed, smoke pouring from his mouth, nose, eyes, and ears. The temperature in the clearing dropped 30 degrees in seconds. The entity separated from Austin's flesh, becoming visible as it had been before. Tall, made of heat distortion and fire, eyes burning with ancient rage. "You banish us?" the jinn roared, its voice shaking leaves from trees. "We are Kararib. We have claimed these groves for centuries. We will not." "You will," James said, voice breaking with emotion and terror and desperation. "You will release him. You will leave my family alone. You will return to the trees and sleep. By the names written on my daughter's photograph. By the power of those who lived here before either of us. By your own true name spoken thrice. I bind you, Kararib." The jinn screamed, a sound like forest fires and breaking wood. Its form flickered, becoming less solid, more smoke than substance. It lunged toward James but stopped short, as if hitting an invisible barrier. The symbols on the photograph were glowing, burning with cold white light that the jinn couldn't cross. "This is not ending," Kararib hissed. "This is delay. We sleep now, but we wake. We always wake. And when we do, we remember. We remember the father who bound us. We will remember the child." Then the jinn dissolved, smoke rising into the redwood canopy, dispersing among the ancient branches, until nothing remained but the smell of cinnamon and burning cedar. Austin Fletcher collapsed. James caught him, checked vitals. Breathing, pulse, responsive but confused. He'd survived the possession somehow, though his memories of the last 3 days would be fragmented at best. James called for extraction, gave his location, and waited for the SAR team while cradling the photograph of his daughter. The symbols drawn by the elders were fading, their power expended. Emma was safe, for now. The official report listed Austin Fletcher as found alive after getting disoriented in the grove, suffering from exposure and dehydration. Rachel Nguyen recovered from her burns, though she requested a transfer to Joshua Tree and never spoke about what she'd seen. Austin returned to Portland with no memory of his possession, just 3 days of missing time and nightmares about fire. James stayed at Redwood another 6 months, until the debt was manageable and he could transfer closer to home. He moved to Golden Gate National Recreation Area. Urban park, no old-growth forests, no ancient trees that could house things older than history. Emma's fever never returned. The cancer remained in remission. But sometimes, on still nights, James would smell cinnamon and cedar smoke and know that Kararib slept but remembered. The photograph stayed locked in a safe deposit box in San Francisco, still covered in protective symbols that Mrs. Patterson renewed yearly. James never carried his daughter's picture again. Some connections were too dangerous to maintain. Some loves had to be protected from afar. And sometimes late at night, Emma would wake from dreams and tell her father about trees with faces, about smoke that watched from the forest, about something old and patient that was waiting for the symbols to fade and the binding to break. James would hold her, promise her safety, and know that some promises were beyond a father's power to keep. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The trees were growing closer together. David Ramirez measured the distance between 2 coast redwoods with his rangefinder, a Nikon Forestry Pro that he'd used for 6 years without question. 43 feet separated the massive trunks. He checked his field notes from yesterday's patrol. Same trees, same measurement point, 61 feet. 18 feet of forest had simply disappeared overnight. David looked up at the towering sequoias, their crowns vanishing into the perpetual fog that gave this section of Redwood National Park its reputation. 300 feet tall, some of them. Older than nations. Witnesses to centuries of human history, standing long before Europeans arrived in California. And now, apparently, they were moving. His phone buzzed, 1 bar of signal, barely functional. A text from his wife, Elena. Miguel asking when Daddy comes home. Tell him soon? David's chest tightened. Miguel was 4. Didn't understand why Daddy had to work weekends, why the park needed rangers even during a pandemic when visitor numbers were down 70%. Elena was 8 months pregnant with their daughter due in 3 weeks. Every shift David worked felt like tempting fate. What if she went into labor early? What if Miguel needed him? What if... He forced himself to breathe. The therapist had called it catastrophizing, this tendency to imagine every worst-case scenario. But sometimes worst cases happened. Like Derek Sullivan, who'd vanished 3 days ago in this exact section of forest. Derek Sullivan. 34, experienced ranger, David's friend and hiking partner. They'd worked Redwood together since 2016, back when David was new and Derek had shown him the trails, taught him which routes tourists got lost on, which sections of old-growth forest deserved extra protection. Derek had been doing a routine patrol when his last radio transmission came through. David had been at the visitor center updating COVID-19 protocols when he'd heard Derek's voice crackling with static. "David, something's wrong with the Tall Trees Grove. The layout isn't static. Paths keep moving. I swear I passed that burned stump 3 times, but I'm going straight. More static. The trees are watching. I can feel." Then screaming. Not pain, not fear exactly. Recognition. Horror of understanding something that shouldn't be understood. Then nothing. 3 days of searching and nothing. No gear, no trail markers, no Derek. David keyed his radio, the new Motorola APX 4000 they'd gotten in March. Base, Ranger Ramirez. "I'm documenting anomalies in the tall trees section. Tree spacing measurements don't match previous records." The response came from Sarah, covering dispatch during the skeleton crew shifts. "Copy that, David. Probably measurement error? Those redwoods mess with equipment sometimes." "I've triple-checked." David photographed the trees with his Nikon D5600, making sure the metadata captured GPS coordinates and timestamp. June 14th, 2020, 10:47 a.m. "The forest layout is changing. I think..." He stopped himself. What did he think? That 1,000-year-old trees were rearranging themselves? "You think what?" "I think Derek found something. Something that doesn't make sense." Silence on the radio. Then, "David, you need to come back. We can't afford to lose another ranger. Elena called asking about your return time." "I'm fine. I'll be careful." He signed off before Sarah could argue. David had to find Derek, had to prove he was still capable, still reliable, still the ranger who could handle difficult situations, because soon he'd have 2 kids depending on him, and Elena couldn't work 3rd trimester, and their savings were already stretched thin from Miguel's medical bills last year. He couldn't fail Derek, couldn't fail his family, couldn't afford to fail anyone. The fog thickened as David moved deeper into the grove. Redwood fog was different from normal fog, thicker, more persistent, carrying the smell of ancient wood and moisture. The sequoias created their own microclimate, trapping moisture from the Pacific, creating this permanent twilight world where sounds were muffled and distances became meaningless. David found Derek's first marker at what should have been mile marker 7, a cairn of stones with Derek's bandana, bright orange, impossible to miss, tied around the top, but carved into the largest stone in Derek's handwriting: "Paths don't stay. Forest decides, go back." David photographed it, checked his Garmin GPS. The device showed his position, but the trail overlay was wrong, showing paths that didn't exist, not showing paths he could clearly see. He pulled out his compass. The needle wobbled, never quite settling on north. From somewhere in the fog, David heard Derek's voice. "David, is that you, man? I need help. I'm turned around." David's heart leaped. "Derek, where are you?" "I don't..." The voice came from his left. "Can't see the trail anymore. Everything looks the same. The trees keep..." David moved toward the voice, pushing through sword ferns and redwood sorrel. "Keep talking. I'm coming." "Changing, David. They're actually moving. I'm not crazy. The forest is alive and it doesn't..." The voice cut off. David emerged into a small clearing and stopped. The trees here formed a perfect circle. Not natural, too precise, Too deliberate. Inside the circle, hundreds of objects hung from branches on thin cords. Tourist items. Water bottles, hats, cameras, phones. Some looked recent. Others were decades old, sun-faded and weathered. A Kodak Instamatic camera from the 70s. A Boy Scout compass from the 50s. A pocket watch that had to be from the 20s or earlier. And in the center, standing upright as if placed there deliberately, Derek's backpack. His Motorola radio sat on top, still powered on, green light blinking. David approached slowly, every instinct screaming wrong. He lifted the radio, pressed transmit. "Derek? Can you hear me?" The radio in his hand emitted Derek's voice. "David, don't stay here. The forest doesn't want us here. It never wanted us here. We built trails through its body, cut down its children, brought thousands of people trampling through sacred ground. Where are you?" David's voice cracked. "I don't know anymore. Everywhere, nowhere. The trees." Derek's voice broke. "They showed me things, David. What this place was before we came. What it remembers. The Yurok people, they had names for the spirits here. Guardians. The Russians who came in the 1800s, they had names too. Leshy, they called them. Forest lords. But we forgot. We stopped believing. Started treating the forest like scenery, like resources, like..." Static swallowed the transmission. David tried again, but the radio was dead now, batteries drained despite being fully charged. His own radio crackled. "David, this is base. We're showing electrical interference at your location. Return to visitor center immediately." "I found Derek's gear. I think he's still alive. You heard echoes. Acoustic anomalies. This forest plays tricks." Sarah's voice was firm. "Come back now. That's an order." David looked at the circle of trees, at the offerings hanging like warnings. His phone buzzed. "Elena again?" "Miguel had nightmare about you not coming home. Please check in." David's throat tightened. Miguel's nightmares had gotten worse during quarantine, during the months of isolation and fear. The kid didn't understand pandemics, didn't understand why the world had stopped. He just knew Daddy kept leaving for the scary forest. "I'm coming back," David said into the radio. 30 minutes. He turned to retrace his path and stopped. The trail was gone. Not hidden, not obscured, gone. Where there had been a clear path through the undergrowth, now there was only dense vegetation. Redwood sorrel, ferns, fallen logs, all grown so thick it looked like no human had passed through in years. David checked his GPS. The device showed him standing on the marked trail, but his eyes showed wilderness. He tried another direction. Same result. Trails visible on the GPS, invisible in reality. The forest had closed around him, paths erasing themselves, the redwoods standing like sentient walls. "Base, I have a problem." David kept his voice steady through training and willpower. "The trail out is blocked. I'm going to need to bushwhack. Might take longer than 30 minutes. "David, your GPS is working. Just follow the marked route." "The marked route doesn't exist anymore." Silence. Then Sarah's voice quieter. "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" "I mean the forest has changed. The paths are gone. The trees..." He stopped. How could he explain without sounding insane? "I need you to send coordinates for the clearest route out." "Stand by." David waited, scanning the circle of redwoods. In the fog, they looked less like trees and more like pillars. Ancient, deliberate, placed by something with purpose. The bark patterns looked almost like faces in his peripheral vision. When he looked directly, they were just bark. But in the corner of his eye, movement, something tall, covered in moss and lichen, moving between the trees with a fluidity that suggested neither human nor animal. It wore the forest-like clothing, antlers or branches growing from its head, eyes that glowed amber like an owl's in darkness. David blinked, and it was gone. Just trees and fog and his imagination running wild. The radio crackled. "David, I'm showing multiple route options, but they all pass through dense growth. Can you see any clearings?" Negative. It's all undergrowth and deadfall. Then start marking your path with flagging tape. Blaze a new trail if you have to. Just get out of there. David pulled the bright orange flagging tape from his pack and tied a strip to a low branch. Then he started walking, choosing what looked like the least dense direction. 20 feet in, he found his flagging tape already tied to a tree ahead of him. The same knot, the same branch, but in front of where he was walking. Impossible. He'd just tied that tape behind him. He looked back. The tape was gone from where he'd placed it. Looked forward. There it was, ahead of him, as if warning him not to proceed. David tried a different direction, tied another tape marker, walked 50 feet perpendicular, found the first tape marker again blocking his path. The forest was looping, folding space, rearranging itself, keeping him contained. Base, I need immediate SAR. David's calm was cracking. I'm experiencing severe disorientation. Possible environmental factors affecting cognition. Negative on SAR until we assess the situation. David, you're a rational person. What's the most likely explanation? Carbon monoxide, natural gas vents, toxic fungi spores. David's analytical mind grasped for reasonable explanations even as his hindbrain screamed that something older than reason was at work. I'm implementing emergency protocols, David said, activating personal locator beacon, staying put until extraction team arrives. He pressed the SOS button on his ACR rescue link. The device lit up, transmitted for 5 seconds, then died. Battery fully drained. His phone, dead. His GPS, dead. His radio, dying, down to 1 bar of battery despite being charged that morning, just like all those tourist items hanging in the trees. All the technology that had failed in this circle, in this grove where something old still held power. David sat on a fallen log and tried to think rationally. His training said, stay calm, conserve resources, wait for rescue. But Derek had been missing 3 days with full gear and professional training. If the forest could keep Derek contained, could keep David contained. Elena would have to raise Miguel alone, would have to deliver their daughter without him, would have to explain to a 4-year-old why Daddy didn't come home. No, David said aloud. No, I'm not doing that to them. He stood, pulled his Leatherman multi-tool from his belt. If the forest wanted to keep him, he'd carve through it. He approached the nearest redwood, a relatively small one, maybe 60 feet tall, and began carving an arrow into the bark, pointing the direction he wanted to go. The tree shuddered, physically shuddered, like an animal flinching from injury. David stepped back. The carved arrow was already healing, bark growing back over it, erasing his mark. What do you want? David called into the fog. His voice echoed wrong, came back layered with sounds that weren't quite his own. Derek said you're alive, that you remember. Fine, I believe you. But I have a family. I have a son who needs me. I have a daughter I haven't met yet. Please, let me go. The fog shifted and the figure emerged. Taller than any human, maybe 8 feet, its form suggested a person, but covered completely in moss, lichen, and bark. Antlers or branches grew from its head. David couldn't tell which. Its face was there and not there, features formed by bark patterns and shadow, eyes glowing amber with unmistakable intelligence. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere. From the trees themselves, from the earth, from the fog. You carve our flesh. You burn our children. You bring thousands to trample and photograph and consume. The words were English but structured wrong. Syntax from another language forced into familiar sounds. Why should we let you go? Why should we care for your family when you care nothing for ours? David's mouth was dry. I'm just trying to protect this place, to keep it safe. You protect nothing. The Leshy, because that's what it was. David understood now. The Slavic forest guardian from the old world, somehow here in California's coastal redwoods, moved closer. You manage, you permit, you control, but protection means respecting what you claim to protect, means understanding that this forest is not yours to use. The tribes, The Yurok, the Tolowa, they lived here for thousands of years. They asked permission. They thanked the forest for what they took. They understood that every tree cut, every path walked, was a negotiation with something living. The Leshy's eyes blazed brighter. Your people forgot how to ask, forgot how to respect, built your trails and your laws and your visitor centers, and never once asked if the forest consented. I can't change what's been done, David said. I'm just one person. I have a family. Please. He had a family too. The Leshy gestured, and through the fog, David saw Derek. His friend stood 50 feet away, but wrong, partially merged with a redwood, bark growing over his skin, roots extending from his feet into the earth. His eyes were amber now, glowing like the Leshy's. His mouth moved and Derek's voice emerged. It showed me, David, what the forest remembers, the logging camps, the clear-cutting. 95% of old-growth redwoods destroyed in a century. Ancient beings thousands of years old cut down for lumber. Entire groves erased. Derek's face twisted with emotion that seemed both his and not his. The forest remembers everyone. Every tree was a mind, a consciousness. They felt themselves dying. Derek, fight it. You're still you. You can... I don't want to fight it anymore. Derek's voice was calm, accepting. I'm tired, David. Tired of failing to protect what matters. Tired of being powerless while the world burns. Here, I can finally help. Become part of something that actually makes a difference. The Leshy spoke again. He chose to stay, to become guardian, to help us keep the forest safe from those who would harm it. By trapping people, by making them disappear, by making them understand. The Leshy moved around David in a slow circle. We do not kill, we teach. Show what the forest is, what it remembers, what it requires. Most flee, frightened by truth. Some stay, like him, become part of the protection. David's mind raced. His training, his rationality, everything was screaming that this wasn't real, wasn't possible. But he'd measured the trees moving. He'd heard Derek's voice. He'd seen technology fail for no reason, and now he was talking to something from Slavic mythology in a California forest, watching his friend partially transformed into a tree. I can't stay, David said, voice breaking. My son Miguel, he's 4 years old. My wife Elena is due in 3 weeks. If I don't come home, if I disappear like Derek, they can't survive without me. Please, I'm begging you. I have responsibilities. The Leshy stopped circling. Its amber eyes studied David with intelligence that felt ancient, patient, and utterly alien to human concerns. Responsibilities to what you created. But what of responsibilities to what we created? To these forests? These beings that existed long before your kind arrived? The voice was not angry. Worse, it was curious, genuinely questioning. Why is your family more important than ours? It's not... David struggled for words. It's not more important. But it's my responsibility. I chose to have children. I promised to protect them. That has to mean something. The forest did not choose to be logged, did not choose to be made into parks for your entertainment. Yet it endures, adapts, protects itself because no one else will. David felt tears on his face. I can't be both. I can't protect the forest and protect my family. I'm just one person. I'm not enough for any of it. The Leshy tilted its head, branches creaking. Then choose. What? Choose which you value more. Your comfort and your family, in which case we release you and you forget this place existed. You never return, never work these groves, never bring others here. The Leshy's eyes intensified. Or choose the forest. Stay, like him, become guardian. Truly protect rather than manage. That's not... There has to be another option. There is no third choice. There is only what you value most. David looked at Derek, at his friend who'd chosen the forest. Derek smiled, and it looked peaceful, content in a way Derek never had in life. No more anxiety about funding cuts, no more arguments with the superintendent, no more feeling powerless against climate change and habitat destruction. But Miguel's face flashed in David's mind. Elena's laugh. The way his son said, "I love you, Daddy," before bed. The daughter he hadn't met yet, who'd be born soon, who deserved a father. "My family," David whispered. "I choose my family." The Leshy nodded slowly. "Then go. But remember this day. Remember what you saw. Remember that protection without respect is just control. And control is violence by another name." The fog lifted. Just like that, as if curtains had been drawn back. David stood at the edge of the tall trees grove, the marked trail visible and clear, his truck visible a quarter-mile away in the parking area. His equipment powered on simultaneously, phone, GPS, radio, all showing full batteries as if they'd never died. David's phone showed 47 missed calls from Elena, 12 voicemails. His radio exploded with traffic, search teams, helicopters, the superintendent's panicked voice calling his name. He checked his watch, 4:47 p.m. He'd entered the grove at 10:47 a.m., 6 hours. 6 hours of his life lost to something that rational explanation couldn't touch. David keyed his radio. "This is Ranger Ramirez. I'm safe. I'm at the tall trees parking area. I'm coming in." The relief in Sarah's voice was palpable. "Thank God." "David, we've had teams searching for 3 hours. We thought..." She stopped. "Did you find Derek?" "No," David lied. Because what could he say that wouldn't sound insane? "No sign of him. I think he's gone." David drove back to the ranger station, gave his statement, got disoriented in the fog, experienced possible carbon monoxide exposure from natural sources, equipment failure, managed to navigate out using compass and landmarks. The superintendent was skeptical but relieved, more concerned with not losing another ranger than investigating anomalies. They closed the tall trees grove to public access pending investigation. But David knew no investigation would find anything. The forest would be normal for outside observers. It would only show its truth to those it chose. David went home to Elena and Miguel. His son burst into tears when he saw him, clinging to David's legs. Elena hugged him hard, 8 months pregnant belly between them, and whispered, "Don't ever do that again. Don't ever scare us like that." "I won't," David promised. "I'm done with backcountry patrols. I'll request reassignment. Visitor center only. I promise." He kept that promise. Requested transfer to administrative duties, citing family needs and COVID-19 concerns. The superintendent approved without argument. Too many rangers were quitting, burnout was epidemic, and David was valuable enough to accommodate. 3 weeks later, Elena delivered their daughter, Sophia. Healthy, beautiful, perfect. David held her in the hospital and wept with relief and guilt and the weight of the choice he'd made. Derek Sullivan was declared missing, presumed dead after 6 months. His family held a memorial service. David attended, said nothing about what he'd seen, what he knew. How could he explain that Derek had chosen the forest, had become something other than human, was still alive in a way that transcended normal definitions? David never went back to the tall trees grove, but he dreamed about it constantly, dreamed of Derek's peaceful smile, of the Leshy's amber eyes, of trees moving closer together, and trails erasing themselves, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that the forest remembered him, remembered his choice, remembered that when forced to decide between family and wilderness, he'd chosen the small, personal, human thing. He'd saved himself and his family, but he'd also proven the Leshy's point, that humans valued their own comfort over ancient responsibility, their own blood over the world's survival. It wasn't wrong to choose his family, but it wasn't right either. It was just human, small, and selfish, and understandable. And the forest would continue existing, continue protecting itself, continue teaching those who entered with disrespect what it meant to be truly powerless before something vast and patient and fundamentally other. David's career with the Park Service ended in 2022. He took a job with the State Forestry Department, office work, analyzing data and writing reports. Safe, predictable, far from groves where the old things still held power. But sometimes when the fog rolled in from the Pacific, David would smell redwoods, would feel the forest watching, would remember the Leshy's question, "Why is your family more important than ours?" He still didn't have a good answer, just a choice he'd made, and the knowledge that he'd have to live with it forever. Miguel grew up healthy, happy. Sophia learned to walk, then talk, then ask endless questions about trees and forests, and why Daddy sometimes got sad when he looked at the fog. Elena never asked what really happened that day in the tall trees grove. Maybe she knew David couldn't explain. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe some truths were too large for marriage, for family, for the small, careful life they'd built. The Redwood National Park still exists. The tall trees grove still stands ancient and patient, guarded by something older than human law or understanding. Derek Sullivan's name is on a memorial plaque at the Visitor Center, in remembrance of those who gave their lives in service to the forests. David knows the truth. Derek didn't give his life. He traded it, chose something larger than himself, became part of the protection rather than the management. And somewhere in those groves, in the fog and the ancient twilight, Derek still walks. Part human, part tree, part something else entirely. Guarding the forest he couldn't save as a ranger but could protect as a guardian. The Leshy is still there too, still teaching, still showing those who forget to respect what it means to violate the sacred, and the trees continue growing closer together, rearranging themselves, protecting themselves, remembering every wrong done and every choice made. David Ramirez made his choice, saved his family, lost his friend, lived with the knowledge that personal love and ecological responsibility sometimes demand opposite decisions. He doesn't know if he chose right, just that he chose human, chose small, chose survival over sacrifice. And in the fog-shrouded groves of the redwood forests, the ancient guardians remember his choice and wait patiently for the next human who needs to learn what truly matters. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.